Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing genetics and inheritance. Some key things that I want you all to know before we start this lesson is that the terms that we have, any term that you see that is bold and written in pink, you are going to want to write that down. That is something that will be on our unit quiz and that you do need to know. So if you see genetic inheritance like this, so genetic inheritance is traits that parents pass to their offspring. So, hint, you should write this one down, but that is what it will look like throughout the slides when I have a term that I know you will need for your quiz at the end of the semester, or at the end of the unit. All right, so what are traits that these parents are passing down to their offspring? Traits are what make an organism both physically and physiologically themselves, so today we're just focusing on physical traits because we're just starting, but we will eventually talk about like other physiological traits as well. So some examples are your eye color. Some people have brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes. Your eye color is determined by your genetics, the same way your hair color is determined by your genetics, and so on and so forth. Your height, your skin tone, things like that. There's a lot of other things that we don't think about necessarily, but like our allergies, our tolerances, stuff like that also is impacted by our genetics. But today we're just looking at physical characteristics. So we're going to break it down a little further. You have genotypes. Your genotype is the alleles that make up a particular gene. So your genotype is what is coding for you, where your phenotype is what we physically see. So you have a genotype that corresponds to brown eyes. So like I have brown eyes, I have a specific genotype that would be different than that of someone who has blue eyes. And so your genotype is what codes your phenotype. So your phenotype is what you see. So if I'm ever to ask you, what is the phenotype of this person, and I give you an example picture, well, that person has brown hair, blue eyes, is 5'6", whatever. That is the phenotype, but then the genotype will be slightly different because that's just the alleles. And the alleles are just existing within your genetic coding, and they correspond with your genotype. So in a second, I will show you a better example of like what I'm talking about when I say alleles, when I say genotypes, and how those correspond to phenotypes. So, but the first thing we're going to do, real quick, we're going to have a discussion about Gregor Mendel. Simply just, he is very important in the foundation of what we're about to learn. So Gregor Mendel did some experiments on pea plants, where he looked at a bunch of different traits like their seed shape, their seed color, flower color, pod shape, pod color, height, and flower position. So why did he choose peas? Well, they have very distinct phenotypic differences that you can see here. Green versus yellow, purple versus white, the round versus wrinkled, flower position, height, very clear, stark differences depending on what the genotype is corresponding to the phenotype, and they reproduce relatively quickly, so he could study multiple generations over just one season, which you will see the importance of as we continue on with these lessons, when we get to like multi-generations, which we will start working on later. And then due to these findings, Mendel is considered the father of modern genetics. So just a fun little piece of information. So through his experiments, Mendel created 3 laws that are key to our understanding of genetics today. The law of dominance and uniformity, which just says some alleles, which are variants of particular genes, are found at the same chromosomal locus or location, are dominant over the alleles of others. Simply put, some alleles are dominant versus some are recessive, which is terms we will keep using. Dominant alleles are the ones that show. So say brown hair color is the dominant trait. If you have the allele for brown hair color and the allele for blonde hair color, which is the recessive trait, you will see brown hair. If you only have recessive alleles, you will see the recessive trait. But if the dominant trait shows up even if it's just one allele of the dominant trait, you will still see the dominant trait because it's dominant. And then the location thing we will discuss more as we work on meiosis. But it's basically just saying the gene that codes for hair color is always in the same spot. Then we have the law of segregation. The law of segregation says during gamete formation, each parent passes one of their 2 gene copies to their offspring at random. So every parent, you have 2 copies of each chromosome, as we've discussed. So you will pass one of your alleles. So like say I have a brown hair color allele and a blonde hair color allele. Randomly, I could pass my children a brown hair color allele, but I could also pass them the blonde one, but it just depends. It's completely random. And then there's the law of independent assortment, which just says alleles of 2 or more different genes get sorted into gametes independently of one another. So any 2 genes, so like the gene for hair color and the gene for eye color, are not related or connected. I just have brown hair color and I have brown eyes, not because those 2 things go together, but because they both just happened randomly for me. We will see that has been learned to be not completely true, but we will get to that, I promise. Pause the video here if you need more time to write these down. Alright, so Punnett squares is our big focus for today. Punnett square is a table in which all of the possible outcomes for a genetic cross, which is 2 parents coming together and reproducing offspring, what are all of the possibilities for genotypes? Because as we discussed last lesson, there are 4 cells created in meiosis, so there are 4 possibilities every time. So looking at Mendel's P's again, here's just an example Punnett square for pod color, with the capital letters often represent the dominant trait. So the green is the dominant, so that's why it's a big G, and yellow is little g, so those are recessive traits. And this is just a way to show the possibilities are there's 2 of the cells will be big G, little g, and 2 of the cells will be little g, little g. So let's go through this and try it with P-shape. So we're going to say we have 2 parents that we know the genotype of, because Punnett squares only work if you know the genotype. So we have big R, and little r. So big R codes for round P's because it has the dominant allele, and little r has wrinkled P's because it only has recessive, and the wrinkled is the recessive trait. So we draw our square, and we'll just write one parent, big R, and then the other parent down the other side, little r. So this is how you're always going to set it up. One allele, the same parent on the top and the same parent down the side. And now we just combine them. So we have big R as one of our possibilities. We go to the next one, little r is our possibility. Again, big R and little r. So we see the possibilities are 2 are going to be big R, which will code for round P's, and 2 are little r, which will code for wrinkled P's. So in theory, in a perfect world, if we crossbred these 2 and 4 seeds came out, we would see 2 that have round P's and 2 that have wrinkled P's. Okay, let's do it again, now with P color. So let's say we're crossbreeding a parent. One is big G, little g for green. Green is the dominant trait in this case. And the other one is big G, so green. Same thing, set it up, one parent on the top, one parent on the side. We get big G, big G, big G, little g, big G, big G, big G, little g. So now we will see 2 cells that code for green and 2 more cells that code for green with different genotypes. So this is where we're going to use terms such as homozygous, which means both alleles code for the same trait. So you can be homozygous dominant, which is what we saw in our last example, big G, or you can be homozygous recessive, which is when you see the 2 lowercase alleles, so like if it had been little g. And we also see heterozygous. So heterozygous means the alleles are different. So we will see big G, little g, like in our last example, or big letter, little letter. Heterozygous just means you have one dominant allele and one recessive allele. Homozygous means 2 of the same alleles. So heterozygous will always code for the dominant phenotype. homozygous can code for either the dominant or the recessive phenotype. But like we talked about earlier, we only can see the recessive phenotype if it's 2 recessive alleles. Alright, so now I want you guys to try this, draw it on your own piece of paper, pause the video, and see what you get. So we're going to do 2 parents. Purple is the dominant trait, and we're big P, little p for both parents. So pause the video, practice yourself. So here's our answer. We will get one that is big P, one that is big P, another that is big P, and one that is little p. So this is our genotypic frequencies. We have 25% that are homozygous dominant. So remember the homozygous we just learned, because it's big P that's homozygous dominant. Then we have 50% that are going to be heterozygous. So big P, little p. We will still see purple flowers in that, but they have the ability to pass on a recessive trait, which we will see how that is important when we study multi-generational genetic inheritance. And then we have one of them, or 25%, which is little p, so homozygous recessive. So that will be the one that shows white flowers. And again, these will be more important when we study multi-generations. All right, so quick notes at the end real quick. Today we looked at monohybrid crosses only. So a monohybrid cross is when we're looking at one trait. So we looked at P shape first, then we looked at P color, then we looked at flower color. Those are just one trait that we're looking at a time. We can look at multiple at a time, which we will do again as we do more generational, and this gets more complex. So now it's time for you guys to work on your Punnett Square worksheet that I have for you. Feel free to work in small groups, no more than 3 people please, or work alone. You have the rest of class. Let me know if you need anything. We're going to keep working on Punnett Squares next class, so this worksheet does need to be done by the time next class happens. Thank you. Have a great day.